It was a rainy Monday morning, and Elizabeth Hart had already spilled her coffee twice. Her expensive white blouse had a light brown stain on the cuff, and she was 15 minutes late for her board meeting. Her high heels clicked sharply against the marble floor as she rushed into the tall glass building that housed her firm. No one stopped her. No one dared to. Elizabeth was the kind of woman people whispered about but never to. Smart, cold, powerful. She was the youngest partner at her law firm, only 36 and already managing million-dollar cases. She had a corner office with a view of the city skyline, a designer wardrobe, and a car that could drive itself. She also had no friends at work, not because people didn't try but because Elizabeth didn't let them. She believed in keeping things professional, clean, efficient, distant. That's why she had never spoken more than 2 words to the woman who cleaned her office every evening. Her name was Maria. Elizabeth only knew that because it was stitched in small white letters on her dark green uniform every evening at 6:45 p.m. Just as Elizabeth was packing up her things, Maria would arrive with her cart, quiet, focused, and always on time. Elizabeth never said hello, never smiled, never asked anything. She didn't even look at her. To her, Maria was like the background noise, the same way one ignores the hum of the air conditioner or the sound of traffic outside. She never hated Maria. She just never saw her until everything changed. That Monday morning, the one where Elizabeth had coffee on her blouse and anger in her steps, the day was already going badly. Her client had cancelled, her assistant had forgotten to print the documents, and her boss had made a rude comment about her working too hard. She sat in her office, the blinds closed, head pounding. By 6:30 p.m., the building was mostly empty. Rain tapped the windows like tiny fingers. Thunder rolled in the distance. Elizabeth was still at her desk, staring at the glowing screen. That's when she heard something, a small sound, not the cleaning cart, not the usual swish of the mop. It was coughing, then a sudden crash. She stood up, frowning, and opened her door. At the end of the hallway, she saw Maria's cart tipped over. A plastic bucket rolled down the floor, its soapy water leaving streaks on the polished surface, and Maria? She was lying on the ground. Her small frame was curled, hands gripping her chest. Elizabeth froze. For a moment, she didn't know what to do. She had never spoken to Maria, never asked her anything, didn't even know if she spoke much English, but instinct took over. She ran, dropped to her knees. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice tight with fear. Maria tried to speak but couldn't. Her breathing was shallow, her lips slightly blue. Elizabeth's mind raced. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911. "This is Elizabeth Hart at Gold and Gray Law, 42nd floor. One of our staff members collapsed. She's not breathing right. Please hurry." She stayed on the phone, giving updates, her hands shaking. Maria opened her eyes weakly. You see me now," she whispered, barely audible. Elizabeth felt something crack in her chest. The ambulance came fast. They placed Maria on a stretcher, added oxygen, and rushed her down the building. Elizabeth didn't leave the lobby. She waited, wet from the rain, cold from the shock. She waited. One of the EMTs came to her. She had an asthma attack, he explained. Her inhaler wasn't with her. "You calling when you did probably saved her." Elizabeth blinked. "I didn't even know she had asthma," she whispered. "Most people don't look close enough to find out." The words hit hard. That night, Elizabeth didn't go home. She sat in the waiting room of the hospital. She had no right to be there. She wasn't family. She wasn't a friend, but she couldn't leave. Not now. After hours passed, a nurse came out. "She's awake," she said. "You can see her." Just for a moment, Elizabeth walked in slowly. Maria lay on the bed, a thin blanket covering her. Her eyes looked tired but alert. "You came," she said, voice raspy. "I had to," Elizabeth said quietly. "I'm sorry it took so long to notice you." Maria smiled weakly. "It's okay. Most people don't." Elizabeth sat down in the chair beside her. I want to change that, she said. Starting now, the two women looked at each other. For the first time, not as cleaner and lawyer, but as two human beings. That was the beginning, not just of a strange friendship, but of a deep emotional journey neither of them expected, one that would shake everything Elizabeth believed, and reveal that Maria, the quiet woman in the background, would one day do more than just clean her office. She would save her life again, but not in the way anyone could imagine. The next morning, Elizabeth woke up with a strange feeling. It wasn't fear. It wasn't sadness. It was something she hadn't felt in a long time. Guilt. She sat in her quiet apartment, coffee in hand, staring at the news without reading a word. The memory of Maria lying on the floor kept coming back. Her small, fragile body. The way her voice cracked when she said, "You see me now." Elizabeth had built her life on ignoring emotions. She didn't cry. She didn't pause. She didn't slow down. But now, she couldn't stop thinking about Maria. At 9 a.m., she went to the office. Everyone was talking about Maria, how she had collapsed, how the ambulance came, how close she was to dying. People spoke with surprise, like Maria had suddenly become visible. But Elizabeth didn't join the gossip. She walked to her office, closed the door, and stared out the window for a long time. Then she did something she had never done before. She went down to the janitor's office on the ground floor. It was a small room, barely bigger than a closet. There were 2 chairs, a rack of green uniforms, and a calendar with pictures of Spanish churches. Maria's locker was open. Inside, folded neatly, was her extra uniform. Elizabeth sat down with the building supervisor, a kind older man named Frank. "I'd like to cover Maria's pay while she recovers," she said, her voice calm but firm. Frank blinked in surprise. "That's kind of you. No one's ever offered that before." "She saved my life too," Elizabeth replied. "I just didn't know it," Frank nodded. "She's a good woman, quiet, keeps to herself, sends money back to her daughter in Arizona." Elizabeth raised her eyebrows. "She has a daughter?" "Yeah, single mom, tough life, but she never complains." Elizabeth felt another sharp twist in her chest. All this time, Maria had walked past her, mopped her floors, picked up her trash, and Elizabeth never once asked who she was. She didn't even know she had a child. Back upstairs, Elizabeth opened her laptop and found herself searching for articles about asthma, cleaners' rights, and stories of immigrants working in silence. The more she read, the heavier her heart felt. That evening, she went to the hospital again. Maria was sitting up this time, watching TV quietly. When she saw Elizabeth, her face lit up in a small smile. "You came again," she said softly. "I wanted to check on you," Elizabeth replied. She sat down beside the bed. "I learned you have a daughter." Maria's eyes widened slightly, surprised. "Yes, her name is Elena. She's 17. Wants to be a nurse." Elizabeth smiled. "That's beautiful." There was a long pause. Then Maria spoke again. "You know, I used to watch you every day, always working, always alone. I used to wonder if you were happy." Elizabeth looked at her hands. "I thought I was," she said honestly. "I thought being successful meant I didn't need anyone." Maria nodded slowly. "It's easy to forget people when you're busy." Elizabeth met her eyes. "I forgot you." "I'm sorry." Maria gave a soft laugh. "You're not the first, but I want to change that," Elizabeth said. "I want to know you, not because I feel guilty, but because I think I need someone like you in my life." Maria looked at her carefully, then smiled. "Then start by having dinner with me." "Hospital food is terrible." Elizabeth laughed, genuinely this time. "I'd love that." So they sat together, sharing a bland sandwich and a small apple juice, laughing at how bad the soup tasted. They talked, not about work or money, but about music, food, growing up, and dreams. Maria told her stories about her childhood in a small Texas town. Elizabeth listened like a student, eager, ashamed, and amazed. The next week, Maria was discharged. Elizabeth drove her home. It was a tiny apartment on the far side of town. The walls were thin, the elevator creaked, and the neighbors played loud music, but it was clean, neat, full of love. Maria invited her in. On the wall were pictures of her daughter, drawings, old family photos, and across above the door, Elizabeth looked around and felt something warm, something different. I didn't expect your place to feel so alive, she said quietly. Maria smiled. It's small, but it's mine. Elizabeth sat on the worn-out couch and looked at her. You know, you said I saved your life, but I think you saved mine. Maria tilted her head. How so? Elizabeth looked down. I didn't realize how lonely I was, how blind. You reminded me that people matter more than work, that kindness matters. I forgot all of that. Maria reached over and gently touched her hand. It's never too late to remember. From that day, everything changed. Elizabeth made an effort not just with Maria but with everyone. She began saying good morning to the receptionist. She bought coffee for the security guard. She thanked the delivery guys, and slowly, something in her changed. She smiled more, she laughed, she listened. Maria became more than her cleaner. She became her friend, and what neither of them knew yet was that one day, not long from now, Maria would save Elizabeth's life again, not with a phone call or a hospital visit, but with something far deeper, something that would test their bond, their faith, and their understanding of what love and loyalty really mean. 2 months passed. Elizabeth was no longer the same woman people feared. At work, people noticed how she smiled more often, how she stayed a little longer by the coffee machine just to ask how someone's day was going. Even her assistant, who used to be afraid of her sharp tone, now found her easier to talk to. But the biggest change was in the evenings. Now, instead of ignoring the cleaning staff, Elizabeth helped Maria gather her things and sometimes even waited to walk out of the building with her. They shared simple talks about life, cooking, family, and the shows they watched on TV. One evening, Elizabeth invited Maria and her daughter Elena to her apartment for dinner. It was the first time she had ever cooked for anyone. She burned the chicken a little and overcooked the rice. But Maria and Elena smiled and said it was perfect. They sat at the table, laughing about how Elizabeth nearly used salt instead of sugar for the cake. Elena was bright and kind, with the same warm smile as her mother. She had dreams of becoming a nurse and talked about how she wanted to work with children in hospitals. You raised her well, Elizabeth told Maria that night. Maria looked down with quiet pride. I tried my best. That evening, after they left, Elizabeth felt something she hadn't in years. Peace. But peace, like glass, is fragile, and it can shatter quickly. It was a Thursday morning when it all began. Elizabeth walked into her office and noticed a white envelope on her desk. It had no name, just her firm's logo. She opened it and read the words slowly, her eyes widening with every line. Her heart dropped. She was being investigated, not for anything she did but for someone she had trusted. One of her junior lawyers, a man she had mentored, had forged documents in a big case. He had used Elizabeth's name and signature to make it look real. Now, the blame was falling on her. By noon, she was called into the managing partner's office. We're placing you on temporary leave, Elizabeth, her boss said, his voice cold. Until we finish the investigation. Elizabeth stood there frozen. I didn't do anything wrong, she whispered. We'll see, he said. She walked out, numb, her world spinning. People stared as she passed. The woman who was once untouchable now looked small, broken, and lost. That night, she sat alone in her apartment, surrounded by silence. She didn't eat, didn't sleep, she didn't even cry. She just stared at the wall, replaying every step of her career, wondering how it had all fallen apart. The next morning, there was a knock on her door. It was Maria. She stood holding a bag of groceries and a small container of warm soup. I heard what happened, she said softly. I thought you might need someone. Elizabeth tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Maria walked in, set the bag down, and hugged her. It was the first real hug Elizabeth had accepted in years. I'm scared, Elizabeth said finally, her voice shaking. I know, Maria said, but you're not alone. They sat down on the couch, the soup untouched between them. I worked so hard to build this life, Elizabeth said, to prove I belonged. And now, they think I'm a liar. Maria looked at her with calm eyes. Sometimes life breaks us to show us what truly matters. I could lose everything, Elizabeth whispered. Then maybe you'll find something better, Maria replied. Elizabeth stared at her. How are you always so calm? Maria smiled sadly. Because I've already lost everything once, and I survived. You will too. Elizabeth didn't speak, but her hand reached across the couch and held Maria's. That night, she finally slept. The next few days were hard. Every call from the firm made her stomach twist. Every headline online that hinted at her name felt like a slap. People who once praised her now avoided her. Friends stopped calling, but Maria kept coming every day, sometimes with food, sometimes just to sit beside her and say nothing at all. One day, Elizabeth looked at her and asked, "Why are you doing this? I treated you like you were invisible for years." Maria shrugged gently. "Because I see you now." Elizabeth looked away, eyes glassy. "And because I believe you." Those words hit harder than any accusation. For the first time, someone believed her without asking for proof. And that gave Elizabeth strength, so she decided to fight. She went through every file, every email, every paper from the case. She stayed up all night, and then finally she found it. A small mistake in the junior lawyer's email timestamp. It showed that he had sent the fake documents before she ever approved anything. It was enough. She brought it to the board. The investigation team looked at the evidence, slowly nodding as they realized the truth. 2 days later, Elizabeth received a call. "We're sorry, Elizabeth. You're cleared. We know you didn't do it." She hung up the phone and burst into tears. Then she called Maria. "They cleared me," she said through sobs. Maria laughed with relief. "I never doubted you." Elizabeth wiped her face. "You saved me again." "No," Maria said softly. "You saved yourself. I just reminded you who you were." That evening, Elizabeth went back to the office for the first time in weeks. People welcomed her cautiously. Some apologized. Some just smiled. But Elizabeth didn't care about the whispers anymore. She walked with her head high, not just because she had been cleared, but because she knew who had stood by her when everything broke. Maria. The woman she never saw. The friend she now couldn't live without. But fate wasn't finished yet, because what came next would shake them both in a way they never saw coming. A danger that would put Elizabeth's life, her real, physical life, in Maria's hands. Again. It started with a strange sound in the hallway, a sharp noise like glass shattering. Elizabeth sat up in bed, heart pounding. The clock on her nightstand read to 43 a.m. She waited, holding her breath. Silence, then footsteps. Slow, careful, her heart raced. She lived in a high-rise apartment with security and a locked door. No one should be inside. She reached for her phone on the nightstand, but it wasn't there. She had left it in the living room while charging. Cautiously, she climbed out of bed and crept toward the door. A creak in the hallway made her freeze. She grabbed a heavy book from her shelf, the only thing within reach, and pressed her ear to the door. Another step, closer. She opened the door slightly and her breath caught in her throat. A shadow moved near the living room. This was real. Someone had broken in. Elizabeth backed away quickly and hid behind the bedroom door, her hand trembling. Around the book, she didn't have time to think. She didn't know what they wanted: money, revenge, her life. Then something clattered in the living room. The sound of something being knocked over. Elizabeth knew she had to run. But where? She looked toward the fire escape window, but it was jammed shut. She had always meant to get it fixed. Now she regretted waiting. Then her eyes landed on the small button near the closet. It was a panic button, one that connected to her building's emergency service team. She pressed it. Once, twice, no light. No sound. It was disconnected. Maintenance had told her about it weeks ago and she had forgotten. She was trapped. her eyes filled with tears. Then suddenly, she heard her front door creak again. Another voice, a woman's voice. Elizabeth? It was Maria. Elizabeth didn't understand. How was she here? Maria stepped into the living room confused. She had come early to drop off breakfast before her shift. It was something she had started doing as a surprise, leaving fresh bread and coffee before Elizabeth woke up. But when she noticed the door slightly open and the lock broken, she knew something was wrong. Then she saw him, a man dressed in black. Searching the room, a knife at his side, Maria gasped softly, ducking behind the kitchen counter. Elizabeth, still frozen in her room, could hear voices muffled. Low, she cracked the door open just enough to see Maria was creeping toward her room, silently motioning for her to stay still. The intruder had his back turned, rifling through drawers. Maria looked around. She picked up a frying pan from the kitchen and tiptoed closer. Elizabeth's hands covered her mouth. She could barely breathe. Then banged sound of metal against the man's head. He dropped the knife, spinning in pain, grabbing at Maria's arm. They struggled. She hit him again, but he pushed her hard. She fell to the ground. Dazed, Elizabeth saw the knife now back in his hand, and something inside her snapped. She ran out. Without thinking, she grabbed the book she had held earlier and slammed it into the man's back. He turned in shock just long enough for Maria to get back up and tackle him to the ground. The two women fought with everything they had, until the man, outnumbered, dazed and bruised, finally collapsed. Maria quickly tied his hands with a cord she pulled from the curtain. Elizabeth grabbed the phone and called 911, her voice shaking. By the time the police arrived, the man was unconscious. He was a former client, someone Elizabeth had helped convict in a past case. He had been released early and wanted revenge. As the officers dragged him away, Elizabeth sat on the floor, hugging Maria tightly. "You saved my life," she whispered. Maria was breathing heavily, her arm bruised, a cut on her cheek. "Looks like we saved each other," she said with a faint smile. The ambulance came next. They both went to the hospital. Elizabeth had a minor cut on her arm. Maria needed stitches on her forehead, but they were alive. That night, lying in a hospital bed, Elizabeth stared at the ceiling. She had always believed she could control her world, that her success, her status, her money would keep her safe. But it was Maria, the woman she had once ignored, who had truly protected her, not just her life, but her heart, her humanity. The next morning, Maria came into the room slowly, wearing a hospital gown and a soft smile. Elizabeth reached out and held her hand. "I've never had a real friend," she said. "Not until you." Maria squeezed her hand gently. "You were always worth saving." Tears slipped down Elizabeth's cheeks, and in that moment, she made a promise. She would never forget what Maria did for her, not just that night, but every day since the moment they first spoke. But the story wasn't over yet, because when the media found out what had happened, everything changed again, only this time for the better. News of the break-in spread faster than Elizabeth ever imagined. The next morning, her office was full of reporters. A wealthy woman attacked in her home. A cleaner saves her life. The headline was everywhere. Cleaner rescues CEO from armed intruder. Everyone suddenly wanted to know who Maria was. At first, Maria was overwhelmed. She didn't like attention. She had lived her life quietly, always in the background. Now, cameras followed her at work. Strangers called her brave. Newspapers asked for interviews. "I didn't do it for the news," she told Elizabeth gently. "I know," Elizabeth said, "but the world needs to see you the way I see you now." They sat in Elizabeth's office together, sipping tea. Maria wore her usual green uniform, but her eyes looked different, stronger, prouder. Elizabeth reached for a small folder on her desk. "I want to show you something," she said, handing it over. Maria opened it. Inside were papers, a letter from a scholarship foundation, a university enrollment form, and a note in Elizabeth's handwriting that read, "For Elena, so she can become the nurse she dreams of being." Maria covered her mouth in shock. This is too much. It's not, Elizabeth said firmly. You gave me back my life. I want your daughter to have the chance to build hers. Tears filled Maria's eyes. She tried to speak but couldn't. Elizabeth smiled gently. I already spoke with Elena. She cried too, but happy tears. For the first time, Maria looked truly speechless. But that wasn't the only surprise. That week, Elizabeth also made a major change in her company. She gathered her entire staff, every department, every level. She stood at the front of the room with Maria beside her. I want to tell you a story, she began, about someone we all walked past, someone who many of us never really saw, including me. She paused, looking around the room. Her name is Maria. She works hard. She never complains. She shows up, even when she's tired, even when she's sick. And last week, she saved my life. The room was silent. From today on, Elizabeth continued, this company will treat every staff member with equal respect, whether they wear a suit or carry a mop. She turned to Maria. We're promoting Maria to head of facilities. She will now manage all building staff, with full benefits, a private office, and a voice in leadership meetings. Gasps filled the room. Then applause. Loud, long, genuine. Maria tried to stop crying, but the tears kept coming. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Elizabeth took her hand. Just say you'll walk beside me. As a leader, as a friend. That night, the two of them went to dinner together. No more hospital food, no more fear, just laughter, shared stories, and real friendship. Over time, their lives became more connected. Maria's daughter, Elena, got into nursing school and moved closer to the city. Elizabeth helped her find housing and even attended her graduation. Maria, now confident in her new role, trained new staff with patience and wisdom. She created cleaning schedules, wellness plans, and even began a mentorship program for other immigrant workers. And Elizabeth, she changed too. She stopped working late every night. She started smiling at people in elevators. She learned the names of everyone in her building, from the mail guy to the security guard. Her cold world became warm again. One afternoon, as they walked through the office garden together, Maria said something Elizabeth would never forget. You know, before all this, I thought I was invisible, just someone passing through. But you saw me. Elizabeth stopped and looked at her friend. No, Maria, you saved me. You helped me see myself. Maria smiled. You were never lost, just lonely. Elizabeth nodded. Not anymore. From that day forward, their bond became unbreakable. People no longer saw Maria as just a cleaner. They saw her as a hero, a leader, a friend. And Elizabeth never stopped telling the story about how she ignored the woman who mopped her floor, and how that same woman risked her life to save her, because sometimes it's not who we look up to that changes our lives, it's who we finally take the time to look at. The end.